Hello and welcome to the FatBoss Guide to Imonar on Mythic in Antorus, the Burning Throne.
Yes, this fight has no brand new abilities apart from some wins that you need to deal while crossing the bridge. Instead, the boss is going to be transitioning between phases every 20% rather than every 33%, meaning that you're going to have 5 platform phases and 4 bridge crossings. Each platform phase has a mix of abilities you saw on Heroic, and they act very much the same way. But with new combinations comes new strategies, so for the first half of this video, let's go over the platforms before we tackle the bridge crossings later.
So for phase 1 on the pool, the tanks will want to move the boss towards the middle of the room, while taunting off each other when their Shock Lance debuff drops. Melee want to stack on one side of the boss and move to the other each time Sleep Canister is applied to one of the melee DPS. When the melee group is 10 yards away, the debuff player should then call for a dispel, and then move back onto the melee group so everyone is stacked up again. Ranged players do not need to do this, they can just remain spread at 10 yards at all time, so they can be instantly dispelled as soon as they are targeted by a sleep canister. Being spread also helps because you won't be hitting each other with empowered pulse grenades that are being applied during this phase. If you get an empowered pulse grenade, you want to make sure that you do not stand in the path people are going to take to get to the bridge when the boss does transition, because players that aren't affected by the debuff are going to be running across it first, and you standing in the way, you're just going to knock them around all over the place. So that's all it is for phase 1, be spread and call for dispels.
Now when you get into phase 2, you want to tank the boss over on one side of the room and have the entire raid stack up next to him. The only people that shouldn't stack up are players with the empowered pulse grenades from the previous phase. They should just chill at the side until their debuff drops. The reason that you are stacking is to keep the shrapnel blast as clumped up as possible. Each time a new set spawns, you just simply move as a group along the wall. Now during this phase you'll have 2 people targeted by the charged blasts. These people need to move to either side of the raid, preferably moving towards their own ship so that the beam doesn't cut straight across the room. If you move to the side of the room that is further away from your ship, it's far more likely you'll hit players with it. So if the right ship targets you, move to the right, and if the left ship targets you, move to the left. Tanks will be dealing with Sever during this phase, just taunt off each other whenever it's good, and the off tank shouldn't really need to soak the extra shrapnel blast mines in the room, as they should be neatly stacked up against the wall. However, if you do have the occasional one land outside of the raid, then you might want to quickly run over to it and soak it when it's safe to do so.
Moving into phase 3, this is probably one of the more tricky phases. Some guilds actually decide to bloodlust here, while other guilds will actually save it for phase 4. During your progression you might want to try out both, just to see what's best for your DPS cooldown alignments. You'll want to drag the boss to the far side of the room and place him up against the wall. Ranged players should be spread across the room. You'll have sleep canisters, empowered pulse grenades, as well as shrapnel blasts. You'll need to react and adjust your movement when the shrapnel blasts come in, as people might move within 10 yards of you, which of course you want to avoid. The melee DPS want to be stacked directly behind the boss, right against the wall. Whenever a shrapnel blast spawns on the melee camp, the melee just move as a unit as the boss is dragged a little further away. When the sleep canister is applied to a melee DPS, they need to move very quickly out of the melee camp and just call for a dispel. However, if they're slow to react, it's unlikely that they're going to make the full 10 yards distance that's required to not apply the sleep to everyone else, so the melee camp might need to readjust before the debuff player is dispelled. Now because melee need quite a lot of space to move into, the ranged DPS should really make sure they don't stand too close to the boss, otherwise potentially you're going to cut them off with shrapnel blasts. You could also create issues involving the sleep canister, so just keep your distance.
Moving into phase 4, so tanks, whilst you're taunting for Sever, you want to drag the boss to the clear side of the platform as soon as you enter the phase. The entire raid wants to stack up next to the boss at this point. There will be a few players with pulse grenades from the previous phase. They need to stand far away from the group until their debuff drops, at which point they can join everyone else. Now you have empowered shrapnel blasts, which you just need to move out of the little swirly circles, as well as charge blasts that you'll need to put on either side of the stacked raid group. But most importantly, you're going to have sleep canisters in this phase as well. Just like the way that melee do it in phase 3, you need to quickly move away from the stacked group if you're targeted by the canisters. The rest of the group should also move away from you so you can be safely dispelled. Now just make sure that the 2 sleep canister players do not run out in the same direction, otherwise one of them is going to be stunned for 8 seconds, which isn't ideal.
And the last phase, of course, is phase 5, which is actually a lot easier than the previous 2 phases, assuming that you have everyone alive. The tanks will want to position the boss in the middle of the room, just like they did in phase 1. The melee want to stack up on one leg and move to the other each time the sleep canister comes in. The ranger want to be spread around the room, just so they can instantly be dispelled. And on top of this, you're also going to have empowered pulse grenades, so you're already countering that just by being spread. Empowered shrapnel blast circles need to be sidestepped, whilst the tanks try and stay alive as long as possible against the empowered shock lance. You want to be taunting off each other every 2 to 3 stacks or so, whilst just chaining cooldowns. This is pretty much all you can do. This last phase doesn't last that long anyway, especially if the majority of your DPS is alive, and of course execute DPS will kick in as well at this point, so you should be able to kill the boss before your stacks become too crazy. And that's all you need to know for all the phases. So next to learn is the bridges.
So the bridge intermissions are arguably the most difficult part of the encounter. Mechanically, they're pretty much the same, aside from winds that will now push all players regardless if they're on the bridge or not, and these winds will go away once the boss is interrupted. Now the damage from the traps is now significantly higher, as well as the ticking damage from the boss. Your aim for each of these phases is just to get the raid as quickly and as safely across the bridge as possible. Now this is done by just having a few members of your raid clear the path for everyone else. For each crossing, you ideally want to have one pathway across the bridge. This will give everyone a clear area to run down with enough space to sidestep the incoming orbs, which will damage and slow you. Now there are multiple ways of achieving this, but we'll cover the way that we did it, as well as other strategies that you might find useful. So, the first and the third bridge will spawn the green traps, so you'll have the grenades and the stun mines, and the second and the fourth bridge will spawn the red traps with the tripwires and the shrapnel blasts. So let's have a look at these first and third bridge crossings first with the green traps. To clear a path, a mobile immunity class such as a hunter or a paladin should run along as much of the bridge as possible, clearing the traps in the way. Having a warlock gateway set up along one side is very useful here, as the immunity player can take the gateway whilst immune, which will clear a ton of traps in one go. The immunity will of course eventually drop, and it is likely that the person wouldn't have been able to clear the entire bridge. At this point, the tank should take over and clear the rest of the traps. Now, as Loz said earlier, anyone with the empowered pulse grenades really need to make sure that they move out of the way so that everyone can move down the bridge first. Once the coast is clear, those players should then follow the rest of the group. So one of the main challenges for these green trap crossings is the dispels. Healers really need to make sure they remain in range of the person clearing, just so they can quickly dispel the stun, including dispelling the person who has the immunity, because of course immunities only stop the damage from the trap, not its effect. Also to note for healers, the damage from these green crossings isn't particularly high, so you shouldn't need to use a ton of cooldowns as you cross. However, as a safety net, you might want to assign a single 2-minute cooldown just to make sure this bridge goes even cleaner.
Okay, so let's move on to the hard traps, which is your second and fourth bridge crossings with the red ones. Now to clear the path, you're going to need one player clear the entire way with a movement speed increase and an immunity, ideally Blessing of Protection. The shrapnel blast damage is physical, so it is mitigated briefly by the Blessing of Protection, but the tripwires will be bursting out on top of the raid. To counter this, you want everyone in the raid, apart from the person that's running down, to stack up and wait at the start of the bridge and use the majority of your healing cooldowns to cover the incoming damage. There is no point in the fight where your healing cooldowns will be as good as at this point, so you need to make sure you use them here. It is, however, unlikely that the single player is going to clear every single tripwire in your way, so you'll want to assign one set of cooldowns for the initial burst, and then use mobile ones later as you're moving down, such as Trank and Revival, as it's very likely that you're going to trigger more of them as you get towards the end. Now the person that is clearing the bridge is going to have a shit ton of shrapnel blast dot stacks. The idea is, once they've cleared the bridge, they simply die and just get rezzed by an Ankh totem. If you do not have a shaman, then you can always use battle rezzers here instead. The best person in your raid to be the person that's clearing the bridge as you run across is definitely your tank, as they'll be able to survive the damage from all the tripwires without needing a healer there. And once again, Warlock gateways are so useful at this point, not just to clear the area, but also for the rest of the raid to cross the bridge more quickly. Now with these particular bridge crossings, it's very important that you don't start clearing them immediately, because you can have a charged blast come in just before. And if you decide to run down there and pop a bunch of tripwires, the players are definitely going to die, especially if they're not inside the healing CDs. So wait, make sure that everyone is stacked up, make sure the raid is healthy, then pull the trigger and just clear the bridge as fast as you possibly can.
Now a couple last tips before we end this video. During the standard phases, the off-tank or a very tanky DPS might want to move over towards the bridge and clear any traps that are cluttering up the entrance. Whilst doing this, just make sure that you have a dispel available for the stun trap, or just make sure that the raid is healthy for any of the tripwires. And of course, don't go running down the bridge, you're very likely to die to the rockets that the boss will throw your way when you're not on the platform. Last but not least, there is a new popular strat that is emerging and it seems really good. Some guilds are simply 6 healing this fight. This is to make the bridge safer and quicker, as you have more dispels for the green crossings and more cooldowns and healing for the red crossing. The idea is, by having these bridges become safer, quicker and cleaner, you have just removed the hard part of the encounter. And for those that are worried about enrage timers, bringing more healers may even be a DPS increase, as you can spend more time actually damaging the boss as you cruise much faster across the bridge. As you can see with the on-screen footage, our earlier kills bridge crossings are very tight and they rely on a lot of personal play. That was simply because on our first 2 trips across the bridge, we did not clear enough traps, and in hindsight we should have cleared far more of them. That said, we did still manage to kill the boss. However, if we brought those 6 healers, we would have had that extra dispel for the green crossings making it cleaner, and those extra cooldowns making it so you can do the red a little bit faster without having to shit yourself about killing extra people. So we do definitely recommend that you bring that extra healer if you are struggling on these bridges. And with that extra healer, they can even do some damage during the standard platform phases, as there isn't always a lot of healing to do.
But that's pretty much all you need to know for this encounter. If you'd like to refresh your minds on anything that we've spoken about today, or even see some simple map style pictures of where you need to stand on each of the platforms, then go check out our work over on Wowhead. The link for that is in the description. But before we do go, as always, we'd like to give a huge thank you to all of our supporters on Patreon, some of which you can see on screen now. You guys are absolutely awesome, and we shall see you all in the next video.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching.